and welcome back to the Winterthur podcast. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and we are so excited for you all to experience the magic of Yuletide at Winterthur. This year's Yuletide is inspired by beloved works of literature. The house tour highlights nearly 20 literary classics through colorful, inventive, and whimsical displays. Each story comes to life with objects from the museum's collection, including Victorian combs and pocket watches, centuries-old toys, and historical clothing. While this year's Yuletide is full of novel ideas, in today's episode we're looking back at our illustrious founder, Henry Francis du Pont, and his holiday traditions. We are joined today by Tyler Johnson, Winterthur's Assistant Manager of Estate Tour Programs, who will take us back in time to experience Henry Francis du Pont's family holiday traditions. Thank you for joining us, Tyler. Can you tell us about what an average holiday would look like for Henry Francis du Pont and his family?
That's a special and fun time of year. Is the reason we celebrate DuPont family stories during Yuletide throughout various seasons. Holidays are important to the DuPonts. Henry, his sister Louise Crowningshield, their mother, Pauline Foster, she really liked Christmas. She was from New York, where there's traditions of hanging stockings, and she's the first one to have a tree decorated in the Winterthur home. So Henry Francis and his sister, born late 1800s, have a tradition of honoring Christmas as an important holiday. Throughout the years, Henry's dad becomes senator, and he has to become this great host for senator who's down in D.C. representing Delaware, all of these big folks coming over from either New York socialite families, Boston socialite families, gentlemen farmers, industrialists. Henry, a young man, 20 years old, he's becoming a good host. He really has a lot of flowers being moved around for dramatic displays inside the house, flower arrangements. We still have flower arrangements in the house in 2025. But back in the day, he pulled no punches with the amount of arrangements and colors. And then a really nice dinner where plates, flowers, everything's color coordinated for a wow factor. And everyone had a really large meal. And this isn't even during Christmas time. So as he's becoming a better and better host, Christmas becomes one of the showstopper events every single year for Henry, his family, and then the guest list. If you're a guest of this family, there's two types. You're either coming for Christmas dinner, and you arrive at tea time, late afternoon. You have dinner, and then after dinner you have some drinks after dessert, and then you go home. Or you're a weekend guest. And if you're a weekend guest, you actually stay at the DuPont's house. You're going to arrive maybe the 23rd, Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve day, guests would come in. And apparently Henry's wife, Ruth Wales, would be sitting next to a mound of cakes and cookies and all sorts of snacks for everyone to have before they even had a lunch in which everyone always had too much to eat. Christmas Day seemed to have a normal ritual, at least in the later years for Henry Francis. His house becomes a museum in 1951, and he moves across the street to a smaller house known as the 50-room cottage, which is today our museum store. And he still had big holiday events in there, but that's where we learned the most about Christmas, at least in terms of guest life in the house. And a man named Walter Heacock was invited to over, I think, 12 to 15 Christmases during his lifetime, and he got to see the final ever Christmas at Winterthur by Henry Francis du Pont. So Henry Francis and his wife, great hosts, making sure that folks had plenty to eat, drink, and to do while they're here on this estate. A lot of times in between breaks, they could go, Henry would say, let's go see the turkey farm. Or would you like to see the new installation, the new room that we just put into the house? Let's go walk in the garden. So there's always something at Winterthur or nearby friends like Longwood Gardens. Henry and his guests, sometimes during Christmas days, would go over to Longwood Gardens and see his cousin Pierre and those grounds. So A lot of entertainment in terms of things to do on this estate and neighboring estates. Christmas Eve dinner, the color coordination, red and white plates, red plumbago on the table, and lobster and other various foods that are colored red. I found a few menus for Christmas Eve dinner, so red and white usually. After Christmas Eve, everyone would have a dessert and go to bed, wake up the next morning, and famously, whether it's the holidays or not, you sign the guest card. And you will write down what time you want to be woken up, what you want to eat, what you want to drink, and they'll bring it to you on a nice little rolly cart. You can have breakfast in bed, not actually in the bed, but you could go over to the table. And the staff here, even during the holidays any day, they were really good for the guests, making sure that anything that they needed was brought to them: towels, fluffed pillows, extra sheets, that kind of stuff. Many folks who come back and comment on staying here for a weekend often will note that Henry Francis's staff was super helpful and made life just very, very delightful while they were here. Around 11 a.m., everyone would open their presents. So Du Pont family members, guests of the family, would have baskets, and each basket had their own little name tag. And you'd go in and you'd get your basket. And presents usually weren't anything super expensive or spectacular, more thoughtful things like books that they knew they liked to read, or nice piece of fabric, things like that. After that, it's lunchtime, which, once again, they would have far too much to eat. And then everyone would get ready for a yearly tradition called Mr. Harry's Party, in which Henry Francis bought gifts for all of the kids who lived on this estate. Sometimes there's over 280 people on the Winterthur property. That's Winterthur employees and all of their family, including children. Mr. Harry's Party would be held at various locations throughout Winterthur. Sometimes in our clubhouse that still stands, they have a stage in there. And then later in Winterthur history, when the visitor center was built, it was called the Pavilion. They would have Mr. Harry's Party in the Pavilion, where all the kids on the estate would come in and watch a show. We've had a dancing dog act at Winterthur, magicians. There's also music and things like that. And all the kids would receive a present that HF purchased personally, as he shopped Wanamaker's before that. And gifts were based on how old you were. So they have categories. If you were like 5 to 7 years old, you'd get this, so on and so forth. After Mr. Harry's Party, everyone would go back, and it's dinner time. And Christmas dinner in the cottage, usually silver and white. The entire table loaded with flowers, the silver and white plates, and if there was any other kind of materials on the table, it was usually clear glass for a Waldorf salad. Christmas Eve dinner changed a lot, but there's staples of it that are almost always there when you look at the library archives. What's the most normal thing to have on a Christmas with the Du Ponts? It's turtle soup. Terrapin soup. And it's funny how many Yuletide tours I have guided in the house. We bring up turtle soup so many times in Winterthur lore because it's really important. It's one of the reasons we know so much about turtle soup here is from the Walter Heacock oral history, which he talks about how good the soup was. And he talks about how it was a brown sauce with large chunks of meat. It always had bones and turtle eggs, and it was served with sherry. Mr. Du Pont very much cared about terrapin soup, turtle soup. He's not always too picky, but if you took some soup for your portion at the table and you're here for dinner, he's watching to make sure you finish. Walter Heacock would figure this out, so he would always ask guests, kind of on the low. He would say, "Have you ever had turtle soup before?" He would tell them, "All right, take a little bit and see if you like it first before you fill your plate." Henry watches to make sure you eat it all. After you finish the delicious and well-renowned legendary turtle soup, the next course would be hothouse cauliflower and small heads served with butter and hollandaise sauce, and they are usually accompanied by a special drink, maybe a white wine or a different kind of alcohol. The main course is usually a roasted pheasant or stuffed bird, stuffed with white grapes, big platters, and the Waldorf salad would be served in that clear glass that we mentioned before. After you ate all that, it's dessert time. and everything came out for dessert. But a holiday staple was flaming plum pudding. So hopefully your clothes weren't too flammable as this delicious burning dessert was served right in front of you. There's also apple pie and ice cream and all sorts of cakes and chocolates and candied ginger. Add port and Madeira wine, and these guests would stagger to the library at the end of the day, and they would have coffee and brandy. And they'd always have different house guests, but some staple house guests, depending on which decade you're looking at for Christmas with the DuPonts.
Henry Francis was very proper about etiquette, including the stationery invitations and menus. Can you tell us about some of these sources as it relates to the holidays?
Yeah, that's a great question, and very thankful for our research library. The Winterthur Library famously boasts over 1 million stuffs. And it's not just books and printed ephemera, but it's also got like cavalry sabers and travel bags and purses and such. The library is where I learned so much stuff of lore here at Winterthur. How do we know what we know? Because Henry Francis not only collected so many objects for his house, he kept so many sources about what made Winterthur what it is. So when I go to the library, I'm able to request all sorts of different things, including old Christmas cards, pictures of them that they sent to other folks. Right here in front of me, I have a 1911 breakfast, lunch, and dinner menu, where Sunday, December 24th, brunch, eggs on eggplant, boiled squabs, a cold turkey salad, and a chocolate cream cake. Then for dinner on the 24th, in 1911 again, caviar, griddled cakes, whipped cream, clear soup, fish, oyster, crabs, boiled duck, apple, rice, oyster plant, cheese souffle. This is all just one document from 1911 that Henry chose to keep. So then we know what they had for dinner in 1911. You copy this with the guest list from 1911. We have what's called the day book. We also have copies of what person stayed in what room during what time. So you're able to learn a lot about what's going on in the picture of 1911. Also, you find things like, when do they get Christmas ornaments? Bill of sale to George Washington Travers Company. Importers of toys and dolls, manufacturers of children's dolls, vehicles, chairs, and etc. from Hoboken, New Jersey. November 22nd, 1923. Sold to Henry Francis du Pont at Winterthur, Delaware. 48 tree ornaments, 48 more tree ornaments, and then 24 tree ornaments. So he's getting over 100 tree ornaments in 1923. This random note that I don't have a year from. Mrs. DuPont thinks it would be nice to have a small Christmas tree for the children to decorate in their room. Do you want to get one in the ornaments? It is not signed, but I imagine this is from a staff when Henry Francis and his wife Ruth Wales have their 2 daughters. And the children would be Pauline and Ruth Ellen, and they're talking about passing on that tradition and love of the holidays, just like Henry Francis's mom did in the beginning of their life. Henry Francis kept so much of this stuff for the library that we know. So by keeping all of this very important stuff, we're able to get so many gleans and snippets into what life was like here. December 7th, 1926. This is from Henry Francis du Pont to Maillard Incorporated in New York City. And I believe this is a bakery. And it says, "Gentlemen, will you please send to me at Winterthur, Delaware by express 12 Santa Clauses, 8 chocolate shoes, 6 chocolate slippers, 1 pound of pea plain cafe, 1/2 pound of Swiss acorns, and 1 pound of glazed nuts. And by the following express, can you send on the 27th 70 1-pound chocolate specials and 20 1/2-pound chocolate specials?" That leads into another holiday tradition, New Year's calling, where all the DuPont gentlemen go to various estates and leave little gifts to all of the women. Another thing that's really good from the library that I learned is the turkey list. If Henry likes you, he'll send you a turkey. If you are an employee on the property and it's not too bad during the Great Depression, you're going to get a turkey every single year you work here. And during the years of the Great Depression, you'll get 2 chickens. Christmas 1930 turkey list, so this is actually during the Great Depression. Send a small turkey to Mr. DuPont's table at Winterthur, And we need a large turkey for that too. And we need a turkey for the kitchen, that's the employees. One for Bishop Philip Cook, and that's 14th Street in Wilmington, Delaware. So that must have been a friend. I know one for Miss May Tollfree to be sent to Mr. DuPont's apartment in New York City. Miss May Tollfree and Henry Francis and his wife, very good friends. So if you're a friend of them, you're going to get on the turkey list. There's also lists of how much money they spent on all the various people for the holiday. Not Christmas 1930. And they spent $10 for a person named Emma Johnson, $10 for a person named George Russell. The electrician who worked on the property named William Ludlam, they spent $5 on him. The nurse, Margaret Murphy, who they love, $10 on her. The chauffeurs, $10 a priest. There's 3 chauffeurs on this list. Names that I know, like Walter Racine Jr. and Richard Upright. Richard Upright drove 5 generations of Henry's wife, the Ruth Wales family. Another thing, we talked about Mr. Harry's party. How do you figure it all out? And so this is a great one. If you ever want to look up these things, the Winterthur Library is a research library open to the public. In this box called HF 273, there's a file called Heads of Families of 1931. And it has listed 55 heads of families in 1931 who live on the Winterthur property. The very next file in HF 273 is Christmas 1931, and it has got over 280 names, and it actually lists every single person who lives on the property. So it's not only a helpful thing for figuring out what's going on during holiday season, now you got a list in 1931 of the 289 folks who are dwelling on Winterthur's grounds. I have another thing from the library, Christmas 1939. For a guest who stayed over all weekend, his name was Tommy Bullitt, Henry Francis got him a silver tortoise paper cutter with a calendar attached. For Marion Coffin, phenom who helped design the gardens around Winterthur, Marion Coffin got a yellow embroidered 18-karat center case that was only worth $12. Someone like Frank Crowningshield, Henry Francis's brother-in-law, he got a silver-plated conch shell botch, which was worth $10. This is Christmas 1939, so of course money's worth different, but still, none of these are going to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars. For the daughters, 2 suitcases for Pauline Louise. She's getting close to being ready to move out. 2 pearls for her birthday, and a shell table with a decoration for the other daughter. So there's a lot going on in terms of the logistics of who's coming, where are they staying, what are we getting them, what are we feeding them. All of this can be found from our library. Every year for Yuletide, we decorate in the house. Well, they are always decorating in the house. Listen to this one. Christmas decorations in 1942 in the main house. Centerville Stair Hall, 2 12-inch wreaths. Centerville Stairs, 2 more. In the dining room, we would like 6 12-inch wreaths. In the dining room cross hall, can we have 10 12-inch wreaths? Morning room, 2. Penn Reedborn, 1. Port Royal reception room, so that's the main hall where we exit out the self-paced tour. 6 wreaths. Entrance hall, 2. So there is, goodness, over 20 wreaths in 2 floors there. And then also Henry Francis would also decorate the nearby Christ Church, and he would send probably about 6 to 8 trees, depending on what year. On this source I'm looking at right here, he is sending 7 trees to Christ Church and 12 12-inch wreaths. So the amount of Christmas decorations that Winterthur employees had to do for the family, quite noteworthy. And then the last thing I have here is previous menus for December 24th. So here's some fun lunch and dinners for Christmas Eve. 1961, they had quiche and celery okra and collard de cream. That's for lunchtime. Meanwhile, beet soup, scallops with no cheese, quail on toast salad, and fresh pears with mustard. There's also 1962 for their red theme, beet soup, crab meat, loin of lamb, string beans and celery, and you finish with chocolate mousse. So this is how we learn what they're eating for the holiday season directly from the library. It's kind of good that Henry was so particular about what he kept and what we are able to glean from it and then sometimes interpret in the house.
What are some of your favorite holiday stories from the archives?
I've mentioned his name a few times. Walter Heacock. He was the first ever director at Hagley. And he was invited to become director of the Hagley Museum in the 1950s. He was interviewed by the Winterthur Library in the 1970s and in the 1980s. And the reason that he was invited to Winterthur was because Henry Francis, his sister, and their father helped revive Hagley, revive the house. Louise lived there 2 months out of every year. And when Walter was invited to lunch in 1952, it was very much Henry Francis seeing who he was, introducing himself, because they had never met before. And Walter talks about how he was kind of surprised getting the invite list. And once he went there, he thought that that was the thing to do and he wouldn't be invited ever again. And he mentions in the next sentence that he was surprised when they reached out a week later and Henry wanted him back to the house. So what I find very interesting in reading both of Walter Heacock's oral histories, he wanted to talk about holiday seasons at Winterthur. He wanted to talk about what it was like to be a guest of the Du Ponts and spend Christmas time here. And he wanted to remember certain fun things about Christmases. It was fun to see what stuck with him and what was important to him. When he's first invited, he's kind of nervous. He doesn't have a great reputation of Henry Francis du Pont. He leaves. He had a great lunch. He gets invited back the next week, and he meets Henry Francis's wife, Ruth Wales, and he also meets Henry's sister, Louise Crowningshield. And it's a very intriguing line. Henry says, "Have you met my wife, Ruth?" And Walter says in the oral history, "I didn't even know he had a wife." And then he goes on for about 5 minutes complimenting Ruth Wales and Henry about how he admires them for different reasons. And then one of the best lines I ever read, Henry goes to Walter, "Walter, I'd very much like you to meet my sister Louise. Louise, would you like to meet Walter?" And Louise Crowningshield, who every time I read more about her, she's funny, she's brilliant, and she also knows how to talk. She says, "Oh, I very much would like to meet him. He is going to inherit my house." And thus another good friendship is born. Walter Heacock gets asked a few hard questions by Louise right out the gate. She says, "I know you're from Colonial Williamsburg. Are you a fan of insert a person's name here?" And Walter straight up says, "No, I don't like that guy." And Louise says, "Excellent. We are going to work very well together." And so they make good first impressions. And Walter spends the next probably 2 paragraphs talking about how incredible different reasons all 3 of them are: personality, host, wit, humor, eye, design, so on and so forth. He talks about getting invited for Christmas that year. And he actually talks about balancing the table, something that I've talked about in the house before. You need to have completely even numbers if you're going to be a guest of the Du Ponts, because during dinner time, there's an etiquette to it all. You talk to the person to your left for the first course, person to the right for the second course. And so it really helps make sure everyone gets along. The second you have odd numbers, now all of a sudden someone gets left out of the equation. So Ruth Wales du Pont had a list of single bachelors and bachelorettes of various ages that she could call in case someone ever dropped off the list. They were terribly afraid of the number 13. And they had, which Walter jokes about, he's like, "I thought this was a joke, but it's a real superstition. Du Ponts are not going to have 13 guests for dinner. They're going to call everyone they can to have 14 guests, or they're going to ask that 13th guest who didn't make the cut, be like, 'I'm sorry, this is the situation.'" But Walter was invited for Christmas, which he is convinced to balance the table in 1954. After 1954, he comes back for every single Christmas until 1968. He liked Christmas dinner that first year. The second year he came back, he was actually invited as a proper guest, if you will, not just to balance the number of 13. And then the year after that, he talks about what it was like to be invited as a house guest. His first 2 years, he's just coming for the dinner. The rest of the time, up until 1968, he's staying in the Du Ponts' home sometimes 5-6 days. Which is also funny, he's director of Hagley, so his house isn't very far from the Winterthur property. It's only like 20 minutes away. One time while he's a house guest here, he talks about how Henry knew about his house and he just had a bunch of remodeling done. So Henry asks Walter, "Can we bring all of our guests who's here in my house to go see your house? I'd like to see the remodeling being done." Walter also talked about what it's like through the whole day, which I talked about a bit before, but Christmas Eve, They would go to Christ Church for celebration for Christmas Day. Not everyone who was a house guest had to go. You were given the invitation to go to church. But if you were not overtly religious, Walter Heacock was not, he would stay back. And he talked about what it was like to hang out with some of the other guests who'd stay there. And they would drink in the library and get to really work on bonding and stuff like that. Walter also talked about the eccentric personalities who were invited over. And also, I think he's much younger than Henry Francis, but the folks who are invited for Christmas is kind of like wholesome, where the people who are on the guest list, at least in the 50s and 60s, you got to remember Henry Francis is about 70, 80 years old. These are a lot of folks who don't have families to go to or are kind of loners. So there are family units like the Irvings who come every year, but then there's someone like Walter Heacock who doesn't have much family around the Wilmington area. So it's like a family friend you invite over to the holidays in the modern time. So I think Walter Heacock's oral history is one of the best oral histories I've ever read in terms of celebrating the holidays at Winterthur. And anyone who's listening to this can also request to read the oral history from the library itself. They have a whole oral history finding aid where you can see every single one that's been done. I think the Oral History Project is one of the most impressive things that Winterthur's done, because there has been an oral history taken from Winterthur from someone who's either worked here, lived here, or experienced life here from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and I'm very proud to say that there's more coming out as multiple gardeners and guides were interviewed within this last year. So it's very cool treasure that we have, a very special treasure. And you can dip your toes in so many different topics, but if you really want to dive into what holiday life is like here for the cottage, for the final years of the DuPonts, I don't think there's a better source to start with than Walter Heacock's oral history.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of the Winterthur podcast. We hope you enjoyed the glimpse into the holiday traditions of Henry Francis du Pont and the inspiration behind this year's Yuletide celebration. As you walk through Winterthur this season, may you be transported by the stories, the artistry, and the timeless spirit of the holidays. From all of us here at Winterthur, we wish you a joyous Yuletide and a very happy New Year. Follow along on social media to see all of the magic of Yuletide at Winterthur, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.